not a very social democratic policies, let's put it like this. So I would like to start maybe with Ahmed, because I know that you have the least of the time from all of our speakers. I will keep the question on taxation as the last. It is close to my heart. I was working in the European Parliament some years ago on taxation and tax havens, and we met at that time as well, where you were working for to do this kind of implementation, this kind of project in Belgium. So, but I will keep it at the end. I would like to start with you, maybe, to how do you see, what is your vision in the role that is played on different levels, on the European, national, even in regional level, when you talk about investments and financing of investments? How can this influence and ensure, let's say, the targets that we have in social policy in the social democratic family? Maybe your take on that.
Thank you very much. Je vais, chers amis, m'exprimer en français si ça ne vous dérange pas. Et donc je vais peut-être vous laisser, pour celles et ceux qui le souhaitent, le temps de mettre les écouteurs, en vous priant de bien vouloir m'excuser. Merci d'abord pour votre invitation. C'est pour moi un grand plaisir de me retrouver parmi vous dans cette grande famille des socialistes européens pour répondre à quelques questions qui font l'objet de notre rencontre. Tout d'abord, je voudrais vous dire que nous avons avec la Belgique un beau cas d'école. Et puis, bien entendu, j'aborderai les choses au plan européen de manière plus générale. Comme vous le savez, nous avons un gouvernement très à droite en Belgique, avec une composante libérale, une composante nationaliste conservatrice et une composante démocrate chrétienne, qui depuis 3 ans a mis en œuvre les dogmes de l'économie de l'offre, avec une brutalité, une vitesse et une ampleur jamais vues auparavant en Belgique. Ils ont en particulier réduit les cotisations sociales qui financent la sécurité sociale et qui sont payées par les entreprises de près de 8 milliards d'euros, ce qui est considérable en Belgique, sur la législature. Ils ont procédé à une ponction, donc une réduction sur les salaires qui se chiffrera à 12 milliards et demi sur la même période de 3 ans. Donc autrement dit, si vous faites l'addition, plus de 20 milliards d'euros renvoyés immédiatement du côté de l'offre, du côté des entreprises, sans aucune condition, ni condition d'investissement, ni condition de création d'emplois. Donc de l'économie de l'offre, je dirais, dans sa définition la plus stricte. Parallèlement à cela, et compte tenu des contraintes européennes, pour le retour à l'équilibre budgétaire, dans le cadre d'une trajectoire à moyen terme, pour donc la réduction des déficits, mais aussi le désendettement, donc avec en ligne de mire, on y reviendra, la règle des 60% du PIB de dette. En même temps, donc, ils font cette économie de l'offre, donc cette réduction drastique des cotisations sociales et des salaires. Ils sont tenus à faire un certain nombre d'économies, et donc des coupes dans les services publics, dans les investissements publics. C'est ainsi, par exemple, que sur la même période, une de nos plus grandes entreprises publiques, le chemin de fer, donc les transports en commun, subissent une coupe de 3 milliards d'euros. Et je peux, comme ça, multiplier les exemples. 3 ans plus tard, où est-ce qu'on en est ? On en est à une économie qui est à la peine. C'est-à-dire qu'on a une croissance économique en Belgique qui est inférieure à la moyenne de la zone euro. Alors que sous la précédente législature, nous avions une croissance économique qui était supérieure à celle de la zone euro, malgré le choc de la crise financière de 2008, mais avec un gouvernement à composante socialiste qui était très attaché à maintenir le soutien de la demande intérieure, soit par les stabilisateurs économiques que sont la sécurité sociale et la redistribution, soit par le soutien du revenu disponible des ménages et de toute une série d'autres acteurs économiques. Donc nous étions parvenus à stabiliser l'économie et la Belgique, et il ne s'agit évidemment pas ici, je veux dire, entre Européens, d'essayer de monter sur la première page du podium, mais nous étions au-delà, je dirais, de la moyenne de la zone euro en termes de croissance, et nous avions bien résisté aux effets de la crise financière. Donc l'actuel gouvernement, qui met en œuvre toutes les recettes que l'on connaît de droite, est aujourd'hui en situation d'échec. Et du côté de la création d'emplois, on voit pour l'essentiel une création d'emplois précaires à temps partiel, avec une multiplication de flexi-jobs, donc autrement dit de jobs au rabais, à tout point de vue, moins payés, moins protégés. Donc tout ça pour vous dire que la Belgique est un laboratoire intéressant pour voir ce qui ne marche pas. Et alors, et c'est là où j'en viens maintenant évidemment à votre question, c'est que Bien entendu, cela montre qu'il faut faire autre chose. Il y a le volet du soutien de la demande intérieure, ça n'est pas le sujet d'aujourd'hui, et puis il y a l'investissement public. L'investissement public pour relancer l'économie. Alors évidemment, nous sommes confrontés à un certain nombre de contraintes. Il y a d'abord l'état des finances publiques d'un grand nombre de nos pays qui sont encore sous le contre-coup de la crise financière de 2008 et parfois même de manière très dramatique. Mais il y a aussi, d'ailleurs, suite au fond à cette crise financière de 2008, il y a les contraintes du droit budgétaire européen. Il y a la volonté aujourd'hui, à travers tous ces traités budgétaires, d'imposer aux États une réduction drastique de l'endettement public, jusqu'à 60%. Mais à partir du moment où on vous demande de vous désendetter, qu'est-ce qui vous reste comme marge pour pouvoir financer de l'investissement public? Donc autrement dit, de pouvoir, par des financements, injecter de l'argent pour relancer l'économie. De la même manière, vous avez la fameuse règle des 0,5% de déficit structurel maximum, avec même, au fond, l'obligation de parvenir à l'équilibre. Donc on vous demande à la fois de désendetter et de ne pas laisser filer le déficit structurel, de remettre vos comptes à l'équilibre. Dans ce canevas-là, évidemment, les capacités pour les États de dégager des moyens pour faire de l'investissement public sont particulièrement contraignantes. Alors que on sait que les effets multiplicateurs de l'investissement public sont parmi les plus efficaces que pour relancer l'économie en termes de rémunération de l'ensemble des facteurs de production. Et à nouveau, je veux être concret et au-delà des théories générales. Une de nos institutions les plus importantes, c'est le Bureau fédéral du plan, qui doit exister dans toute une série d'autres États, je n'en doute pas, et qui font des stimulations macroéconomiques. Eh bien, ils ont stimulé l'effet de 2 milliards d'euros d'investissement. Donc, autrement dit, si la Belgique devait demain investir 2 milliards d'euros d'investissement en infrastructure, et nous avons d'énormes problèmes d'infrastructure en Belgique, j'y reviendrai, mais par exemple notre système autoroutier, nos tunnels, nos voies navigables, enfin tout ce que vous pouvez imaginer, 2 milliards d'euros, vous avez une augmentation du produit intérieur brut dans les 3 ans d'1,2%. C'est colossal. Le PIB, c'est de l'ordre de 440 milliards en Belgique, donc c'est-à-dire que vous auriez quasi 5 milliards d'euros d'augmentation du PIB après 3 ans. Donc c'est, en termes d'efficacité économique, particulièrement spectaculaire. Mais nous ne sommes pas capables aujourd'hui, en raison de toute une série de contraintes, capables de pouvoir dégager un montant comme celui-là, je dirais, aussi facilement qu'on pourrait l'imaginer. C'est la raison pour laquelle je souhaite maintenant être plutôt dans la prospective, parce que je crois que ce que je vous dis ici, vous le savez déjà. Qu'est-ce que l'on peut faire? Ne doit-on pas, comme socialiste européen, et je crois que ça rejoint les résolutions du Parti socialiste européen, ne doit-on pas obtenir du niveau européen que les investissements publics soient immunisés dans le calcul de l'endettement. Donc autrement dit, c'est de considérer que si un État est amené à emprunter pour financer de l'investissement, notamment en infrastructure, mais on peut imaginer évidemment de l'investissement dans toute une série d'autres domaines. Ça peut être des fonds d'investissement public pour soutenir la recherche, le développement. Mais ne prenons que ces quelques exemples, de les immuniser dans le calcul de l'endettement de l'État. Donc autrement dit, de considérer que pour ce qui concerne le calcul, la trajectoire qui doit nous ramener à 60% de l'endettement public, cela serait immunisé. À partir du moment où il est démontré que des investissements publics ont un effet positif sur la croissance. N'est-ce pas de l'intérêt de l'Union européenne que d'avoir des politiques économiques qui amènent plus de prospérité pour financer les besoins collectifs, les besoins sociaux, la redistribution, et donc au final, pour renforcer l'intégration européenne par le biais d'une prospérité améliorée. De la même manière, nous pourrions aussi considérer que sur le plan Juncker, il y a ici ou là un certain nombre de carences. Ne doit-on pas porter une voix pour dire que le plan Juncker est intéressant par le volume qu'il ambitionne, on parle quand même de 500 milliards à terme, ne doit-on pas demander, obtenir, exiger que le soutien aux investissements de nature privée, c'est bien, mais qu'il faut pouvoir réserver une part pour des investissements publics? Ne doit-on pas permettre aussi, ne doit-on pas demander également au niveau européen, à travers la Banque centrale européenne, qu'il y ait une prise en charge directe par du financement européen et intégré d'investissements publics, avec peut-être une priorité donnée aux zones économiques les plus fragilisées, les plus en recul, considérant que la prospérité des uns finit évidemment par se diffuser sur l'économie des autres, puisque nous sommes une économie à l'intérieur de laquelle les échanges commerciaux sont particulièrement importants. Donc il y a toute une série de pistes à formuler, mais évidemment, nous devons pouvoir aussi être plus ambitieux et pourquoi pas aller vers une capacité fiscale européenne. Alors bien entendu, il s'agit de choisir les bons leviers. Je ne vais pas vous faire un cours sur les recettes propres, évidemment, de l'Union européenne, on les connaît, hein, les droits de douane, le reversement d'une partie de la TVA, etc. Mais on est toujours dans des impôts indirects. Ne convient-il pas, puisque aujourd'hui il y a une dynamique qui vise à appréhender de manière plus efficace et plus intelligente la problématique de la planification fiscale internationale des groupes multinationaux, je parle des entreprises, d'avoir une assiette harmonisée au niveau de l'impôt des sociétés, voire même, pourquoi pas, pour une partie, pour cette assiette particulièrement mobile qu'est l'assiette de l'impôt des sociétés, des grands groupes, avoir, pourquoi pas, une fiscalité propre à l'Union européenne, dégageant des ressources qui permettent de réinjecter, de financer de l'investissement. Je ne vais peut-être pas être trop long, parce que je ne connais pas mon temps de parole. Je vais peut-être donc vous rendre la parole à ce stade, mais je suis évidemment à votre disposition. Vous l'aurez compris, je ne suis pas un partisan de l'économie de l'offre, je suis plutôt un partisan du soutien de la demande, mais en même temps, pourquoi pas être du côté de l'offre quand il s'agit d'investissements qui apportent une valeur ajoutée à notre tissu économique.
Thank you very much. You actually answered most of my questions already, so thank you. But I would like to continue in this debate of public and private investment, especially in these economic inequalities that can be breached, social and economic inequalities that can be breached if you do with a very clever and good policy of investments. So I would like to continue with Aleš, because I was positively surprised when Jonek mentioned at the first presentation at the beginning, when the Czech Republic has 26% of investment being the top in Europe regarding that. So what is the secret? What are you doing that you are so good and you are just the best in Europe regarding that? So can you enlighten us a little bit?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I will maybe try to also talk a little bit about the point that Jonek mentioned in the beginning. Indeed, I worked for the PES a couple of years ago for some time, so I'm happy to be back in the family and also in town. But of course, I'm here now more often than usual. At the same time, on the question you mentioned, I think there is a very easy answer, and one of the reasons why we have such a high levels of investment as part of our GDP is actually the fact that we are still not saturated economy, so we are still catching up, firstly, and secondly, that we have cohesion funds somehow to supplement the national resources. And our debt levels are somewhere else from other countries, and we are at roughly 33 or 34% at the very moment of the GDP of our debt level. And in general terms, we are quite conservative, and the public is quite conservative in terms of public investment, and also in terms of public authority over the investment. But this should not be, in my view, a burden for having projects that have a clear public input. And I think the separation of private and public is very often detrimental, or is actually taken in an interpretation that is actually a bad one, that it's either one or the other. We hoped, or it was possible, that at this panel actually Mariana Mazzucato would talk, and she would probably make the point that I will make a little bit better than I. But when you look at the world economy, and when you look at the big successes of the large corporations that are now somehow dominating the world of digitalization and the new technologies, mostly they have been based on public investment at the very beginning. The issue is that more recently, with the technologies and, let's say, the social progress lagging behind, they are succeeding in avoiding taking the responsible share in getting part of their investment, or getting part of their profit actually back to the society, and we risk this virtuous circle to be disrupted. And this is a case of all over Europe. When you look especially in Europe, actually, not just in the US, where even there, actually, it's becoming an issue. We see, actually, added value somehow shifting out of Europe due to digitalization. We see taxation being shifted out of Europe, and we see more precarious jobs being linked to digital economy than we might have hoped. And it was mentioned in the last panel that greener jobs does not mean necessarily a more decent job, that it's much more difficult actually to say what is more, what is better than what is not. And I think that if I have to use the time that I have been reserved, I would like to make this exact point on the relationship with digitalization that is, in my view, and the Industry 4.0 and other aspects, that is, in my view, the real long-term threat to constructive investment in terms of forging social convergence. I could be talking also on more to-the-ground investment projects that we still need in my country, and so I can also give you some feedback on this and how exactly I think that these projects can be made. But let me focus just very shortly on digitalization. As I said, Europe is, in general terms, lagging behind. Also because the collaboration in investment between public and private has been underestimated and has been taken in a, let's say, in a different and less progressive, in my view, also aspect. It's not that it would be all beneficial outside of Europe, but clearly we are lagging behind. And I think there are good points, also, by the way, in the speech of Emmanuel Macron at the Sorbonne, on making big new projects in terms of trying to catch up with what we see actually around Europe, especially in Northern America. He mentioned a common project on artificial intelligence. If we look on the aspects of digitalization of the economy, artificial intelligence in its potential is able by itself and very easily replace 5, 10, maybe 15% of the jobs that we actually do, even without us noticing. And there are roughly 4 companies, maybe subjects, I will not, or objects, or institutions, how would I call it, but they are formally companies that are able to create something as a state-of-the-art artificial intelligence. It's not artificial intelligence yet, but they are well based on big data and on technology to allow them to do this. None of them, of course, not of course, but unfortunately, are European. And I think there would be a big space for Europe actually to make larger projects that could actually make the linkage that has been made in the heads of our leaders and of our politicians in the 20th century on the project of Airbus. Everybody somehow realized that competing and creating national initiatives in investing in creating aerospatial companies that would be too individualized would not succeed in the larger global market. So they put forces together. A lot of course, private companies take part, but with a huge, let's say, public stake, if I have to put it in this way, and succeed actually globally. Without Airbus, we would be buying only non-European airplanes at the moment, and all the value in terms of technology, in terms of jobs, in terms of convergence that it has brought also, and cooperation between member states would have been somewhere else. And I think that for the 21st century, artificial intelligence might be even a bigger thing than aerospatial development has been for the 20th century. And that might be just one of the aspects that we need to talk about. I know that it's not immediate, but we need to talk about projects like this, and I'm very happy that Emmanuel Macron mentioned it. And we can go beyond. We can go also in self-driving cars, because this will be also an issue that potentially will kill roughly 3, maybe 4% of jobs in Europe in medium term, and shift the added value from Europe and greatly contribute to social divergence. So sorry that I haven't really mentioned investment projects that would lead to social convergence, but I think it might be also timely about thinking of creating big investment projects, big European investment projects that would prevent divergence that we really risk with the new technologies actually coming in and with the added value being shifted out of the continent.
Thank you. I really think that as a progressive family, we need to discuss these kind of questions to put some concrete. But can I continue with you?
Sure.
So they can I go directly then to Ivan. Like your take or your view on one point it was also mentioned before. So now we are starting in the multi-annual financial network negotiations in a couple of weeks, months, I don't even know. But 2020, 2020 on 27, no? And
probably not sure.
Where? Yeah. who knows? And there are a lot of open questions that are linked to that, and that are linked to our panel on investments as well, like the Brexit negotiations, the refugee crisis, switching to security and policies that weren't really in the pipeline when we were negotiating this MFF, and where cohesion policy was a great part of MFF. How do you see the future? And as you mentioned, as Czech Republic using the cohesion money for great investments, like how do you see it for the next 10 years? How is it going to develop?
Well, I see a big opportunity still for the countries that are net recipients actually to catch up, and I think it's for the benefit of the whole single market at the end. And there was a recent Polish study showing that 80 cents out of every euro invested in cohesion policy somehow comes back to the EU 15 or to the core, let's say, net payers into the budget, although this is not exact. So this is something that, in my view, has to be kept until we can really say that infrastructurally and in other terms the convergence has been made. But this is the old type of projects to some extent. There is a big chapter now being discussed, and due to the Brexit we are quite delayed in official proposals from the European Commission, but very clearly there is a big chapter that should be or could be concerned by defense. And I think that even in this political family we should not take it as an anti-pacifist thing. When we look again on the success of the American companies that Mariana Mazzucato writes so well about, it was research invested in defense technologies that made the spillovers in other technologies and actually contributed to a large digitalization. And most of the technologies that we see in these peaceful machines, to some extent peaceful, were actually based on research made on defense. So the spillovers can be larger than the potential, let's say, threats from creating too much of defense infrastructure. And there are, in the European Defense Fund, there are clear initiatives to join projects on defense projects as complicated as the Eurodrone or even artificial intelligence. That, by the way, is playing an increasing and extremely important role in defense technology. And so somehow this is connected. So defense would be one of the aspects that also my country argues for, not because we want to wage wars or prepare for wars, but because this is an area that we can go for and that would be also technologically interesting.
Can I continue with Ivan? Maybe with the same question, but then we will move a little bit further, because you're coming more from the banking sector to try to have your thinking, your ideas, or let's say, what is your take on the European Fund for Strategic, the FC? Sometimes.
Thank you very much for the question. And right at the beginning, it's good to hear that the Czech Republic doesn't intend to wage wars. It's always reassuring.
Not for now.
Yeah.
10 years.
No. We've always been friends, and that continues like that, and hopefully it continues like that in whole EU and the world. First of all, thank you very much for having the opportunity to be here and listen to the very inspiring presentations that we had, the opening speeches in the morning, and then the panels, the first panel and the speakers in this panel. Considering my previous engagement when I was Deputy Finance Minister of Slovakia during the presidency, when we negotiated actually the compromise on FC2, let me really start with the European Fund for Strategic Investments. It's firstly, I agree that it should be claimed, and I know it is claimed, as was the case for Jonakin in his first presentation, that it is a success for the family, for the socialist family. I totally agree with that. After all, it was the socialists who, when the crisis broke, started to claiming that it's not more and more austerity that will get us out of the crisis, but on the contrary, it's investment. So in this sense, FC can be considered our success. At the same time, I have to say that I have some doubts about the extent to which FC fulfilled the original hopes of many of us. At times, I mean, when we were thinking, even before FC was created, it was 2012 at the finance ministry in Slovakia, but also in discussions with other economists around the EU, including Aleš actually, we had a sort of more ambitious idea of having a fund created that would be more equity type, that would be really much larger in volume, something close to the ESM, and that would finance relatively riskier and more innovative projects. In the end, what we got was 16 billion guarantee from the EU budget and 5 million guarantee from the EIB, and the implementation was entrusted to the EIB, which is an excellent institution, but at the same time it has got very specific history of being very conservative and averse to risk. So in this sense, what can be stated is that the original hopes of the 300 billion and now the double announced by Mr. Juncker, I mean, it cannot probably be dubbed all like fresh money, right? So in this sense, it was not such a big success. However, what can be seen as a success is that continuous push for the additionality principle is really changing the way the European Investment Bank operates. So each month when we go to the board, we get more and more projects that are cutting-edge technology, that are more innovative, relatively riskier. So the business model, I mean, for such a big institution, it starts changing, and in this sense, I think it's definitely a success, with some limits, of course. And the second instrument that I'd like to mention could help achieving greater convergence, and it's also related to the question of post-2020, is the financial instruments. Financial instruments, just to sum it up for those of you, I mean, most of you probably know, but I mean, it's when you use EU funds not for grants, but when you invest it, basically you invest it either in equity participation or as a guarantee or as a credit. It has got very, I mean, it has got some, let's say, advantages similar to FC. So with smaller money, you can leverage more than you can attract private finance to finance projects of public interest. And then also it is a repayable form of assistance. That means that once it is paid back, you can use it again. So these are the good things about the financial instruments. Yet there are even critics of financial instruments, and even in this family, and it is sometimes seen as some kind of like financial markets encroaching the terrain of public interest. I mean, it's a matter of how you look at it, but I would argue that actually it's in some areas public interest is much better served by a repayable form of assistance, especially when the support of grants is going to companies that would otherwise be able to repay it. So in this sense, I think it definitely makes sense to use financial instruments. Not to say that they should replace the traditional forms of cohesion money, that is grants, not at all. But I mean, I think that there is not a dilemma. It's just for some purposes it's better to use cohesion money as financial instruments, and for still a majority of projects it's better to use it in the form of grants. And maybe last word, or rather a complaint, is that financial instruments were originally seen as some kind of a smarter, faster, more flexible way of implementing the cohesion policy, and it was shared actually on higher levels of European policy making and national policy making, and everybody was sort of like happy that this is going to happen. But on the national level, it is governed, not national, on the actually EU level and national level, it's governed by so many different universes of legislation that were originally supposed to target the grant systems, you know, like state aid, like public procurement, like the CPR. So it seems like the financial instruments are even more difficult to implement than grants. So if there would be one message for the policymakers in the post-2020, is that whether it would not be possible to consider a special regime for financial instruments. that would be really appreciated. Not to say that, I mean, it should be totally flexible, not governed. It should be. But I mean, just from the principle, it's different than grants, so it should have also different rules.
Yeah. I was working on financial instruments in cohesion policy in 2010. And the idea, we were really optimistic on how wonderful this idea was and how easy should it be to implement, but the result is maybe not there. And just before I go to the floor, because I would like to take a couple of questions before we end. I would just like to ask you maybe, just for our audience, because we have a lot of young people here, I'm sure they are interested in also in some, do you have like, it comes from your mind a couple of very concrete projects that were financed with, like that you are seeing like in the board, you were mentioning before, that you have like interesting projects that are being founded with FC or with even with financial instruments, like something that comes really like Aleš was telling us about the digitalization, about different technologies, advanced technologies.
Yes, I would mention probably investment platforms that the EIB / FC is going to, or is trying to develop for supporting smart cities platforms or urban development in cooperation with the national promotional banks. That's something that I think, I mean, it also relates to the previous panel when it was said that most of the developments or many developments in technology are not already like state-sponsored or state-led. Sometimes, and the bigger parts, as Aleš mentioned, they are, but I mean, the technical development and the developments in way of living and quality of life, it's done on the regional or city level or municipal level. And what good I mean, but it's very difficult to set up a structure for financing very different and relatively micro projects. So it's good that the FC is moving in the direction of setting up investment platforms with the national promotional banks and sort of getting down to the regional or even local level. Great. That would be one.
Thank you, thank you. So I would like to open the floor for questions and ideas, your thoughts about what you heard in the last panel. I know it was a bit more business, banking oriented, but we need to discuss this in our political family because we need to integrate this in our policies in the future. Anyone? Please.
Yes, I have a question or remark to Ivan Lesay. You mentioned that grants should be the better possibility instead of loans, if I understood you exactly. I think there should be a third way. If you give shares or take shares of companies and firms by the European Union, that means the European Union participates in special firms for special investments in special regions. We had a discussion here in Brussels some months ago in this conference on cohesion and regional policy. The problem of grants could be that there's no guarantee against corruption and so on. If the money, I think it's different if you give a grant to a public institution or a public firm or to give it to a private firm, then you have no possibility to control if it is used in the sense which is was the original intention of this grant or loan or a share which you give to a firm.
Sure, yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And when I mentioned the original idea of having some kind of either Eurozone or EU-wide fund at the beginning, this was exactly the idea, that it would participate in some kind, even for infrastructure or some kind of industry, so it could take shares there. But I mean, to set up such a structure on the EU level, probably it was deemed that it is too challenging a task. Policymakers were reluctant to do it, and therefore it ended up in an institution that was already there. This is the EIB, which has its benefits and it has its costs. So basically now it is really a dilemma. I mean, it's a question, is it grants or is it the financial instruments? Each of them have their own advantages, but EU money invested in equity of some companies, it's probably not happening. If you don't count like EIF investments in relatively minor positions, but it's not something that was originally intended and something that would make a difference. So I agree.
Okay, who's next? You have some really good experts here that know a lot about investment, and this is something like you should take care of. Please, the lady. Sorry, I don't know the name.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question to the panel, to anybody who would like to respond to this. And it's about talking about investment, talking about how to measure progress. So what about the GDP? I don't see it as an appropriate instrument anymore, as an appropriate indicator, as it also measures destructive development and not social and environmental beneficial impacts. So do you have any thoughts about appropriate indicators for the future? Thank you.
And we will link it to the Stability Pact. Can you pass the microphone to your neighbor? Thank you. So we take two
Thank
questions.
you very much. Also, thank you very much for the panelists and for this interesting discussion. I would like to link this discussion with the previous one and actually ask you about like what are your thoughts about how the next MFF, the next EU budget beyond 2020, can actually be better targeted for social convergence and for this low carbon transition that we were discussing before, and especially, for example, for the representative from the EIB, that the EIB always says that 25%, if I'm not mistaken, of their portfolio is low carbon investment, I think. But then what happens with the other 75%, or with FC even? Like, okay, yeah, well, 40% of the investments under FC are in low carbon investments. Okay, what about the other 60%? So yeah, I would like to know what your thoughts are about this, and especially taking into account the review of the EIB energy lending criteria that's going to take place next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Super interesting questions. I would like to start with you, Ahmed.
Yes, thank you very much. Je suis entièrement d'accord avec l'idée que le PIB n'est pas un bon indicateur. C'est un indicateur quantitatif qui ne dit rien de l'évolution qualitative du tissu économique, de la société, du cadre de vie, du bien-être, de la redistribution des richesses, de l'état de l'éducation, bref, du niveau de vie général. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle, en effet, la société civile et de plus en plus, au fond, les progressistes sur le terrain politique essayent de développer, d'amener dans le débat politique et économique, notamment en s'appuyant sur des travaux soit d'institutions, soit d'universités, soit même d'organisations non gouvernementales, d'amener de nouvelles formes, d'appréhender, de mesurer l'évolution qualitative de notre tissu économique, de la structure d'une société. Donc, des choses existent, on ne part pas de nulle part. Simplement, il y a encore au fond, en raison d'un système économique dominant, un vocabulaire qui nous est imposé. C'est-à-dire que le système économique dominant ne fait pas que simplement s'imposer par la force du marché, par la force qu'il représente tout court et par les relais politiques dont il dispose et qui restent prépondérants à l'échelle européenne et à l'échelle mondiale. Non, il nous impose également un langage, un lexique, une façon de mesurer l'évolution à un point tel que le PIB reste la valeur cardinale, précisément à partir de laquelle on mesure la situation budgétaire des États avec des sanctions à la clé. Il faut quand même bien se rendre compte que c'est par rapport au PIB que l'on mesure l'évolution de l'endettement, c'est par rapport au PIB que l'on mesure l'évolution des déficits structurels. Donc, il faut bien se rendre compte qu'on est encore prisonnier de cet indicateur qui peut avoir des conséquences particulièrement néfastes. Et donc, à nous d'imposer un nouveau langage économique, un nouveau langage budgétaire, d'introduire la qualité à la place de la quantité. Et oui, on peut, nous, considérer que finalement, le dogme de la croissance économique, s'il ne se considère que par rapport au PIB, est une courte vue, qu'elle ne correspond pas à ce que nous voulons en termes d'évolution plus générale de l'économie, de la société, du cadre de vie, avec évidemment l'intégration de la question environnementale. mais pas simplement, de la redistribution des richesses. Alors, je vois néanmoins 2-3 petits signaux, et je rebondis alors sur le cadre financier. Je vois deux, trois signaux. Moi, je suis toujours très attentif à la manière dont évoluent les temples de la pensée dominante. Bien sûr, il y a évidemment toute une série de think tanks, d'officines qui sont très marquées par le fait qu'elles sont rattachées au système économique lui-même. Mais à côté de ça, vous avez aussi le ton qui est donné par des institutions. Je vais prendre l'OCDE, par exemple. L'OCDE, c'est une étude sortie par l'OCDE qui est passée un peu inaperçue et qui, dans tout son développement, arrive à la conclusion que lorsque l'on réduit les inégalités, par exemple, eh bien, on rend les économies plus fortes. Et réduire les inégalités, c'est la redistribution. C'est d'abord la répartition primaire des ressources fondamentales, mais aussi la redistribution des richesses et les investissements que l'on fait dans les services publics, dans l'éducation, dans la santé. C'est très intéressant. On ne lisait pas ça dans la littérature de l'OCDE il y a encore une petite dizaine d'années. Donc on sent une première évolution. De la même manière, le FMI, et ça date d'il y a quelques mois, un groupe d'économistes rattachés au FMI explique que pour pouvoir relancer l'économie, il faut abandonner un certain nombre de paradigmes qui ne sont acquis qu'à l'idée de l'économie de l'offre pour pouvoir mettre davantage à contribution les hauts revenus, les grands patrimoines, pour dégager de la ressource et financer de l'investissement public. Donc on voit que dans certains temples, je dirais de la pensée dominante, mais qui donne le ton quand même sur les politiques économiques, financières, budgétaires des États, on voit des évolutions. C'est très intéressant. Finalement, nous avions, nous, progressistes, raison avant eux, mais tant mieux s'ils nous rejoignent. Mais on doit peut-être s'appuyer là-dessus pour en effet proposer autre chose. Alors pour le reste, en effet, et sur la composante carbone, vous avez raison. Nous n'avons plus le choix. Donc, nous n'avons plus le luxe dans les choix que nous faisons, dans la manière dont nous finançons les investissements, dans les choix économiques que nous faisons en termes également de soutien à tel secteur plutôt qu'à tel autre, dans l'investissement, dans la recherche et le développement. Nous n'avons plus le luxe de ne pas intégrer en permanence et de manière prioritaire la question environnementale et donc la faible teneur en carbone de la richesse que nous produisons, de la valeur ajoutée que nous produisons. Et donc oui, moi je pense que c'est un combat que l'on doit mener, en particulier dans la renégociation des futurs cadres financiers pluriannuels. Donc moi je vous rejoins totalement.
Thank you very much. We will continue with Aleš. Ivan?
Well, first, on the question of GDP, I think much smarter people than us, and surely than I, have made many attempts to somehow find a better measure than this. I can just remember the working group of Amartya Sen and Joseph Stiglitz and others actually who has made an inquiry into this. Their conclusion was actually as simple as gross disposable income of households. That was somehow a consensual point. This is not perfect, but this is basically what the households receive in a way of payment, and then of course deflated by the rise of prices and of the access of and then by the purchase power, basically. I still think that this is not completely complete, but I understand why they have offered this, and I think it has to be complemented by something like a composed indicator of inequality, certainly. It's not Gini, it's not the share of the highest 20 percentiles to the lowest. I think it has to be composed because either of them has a certain value. But in a combination of how much money actually a household, an average household or average person actually receives, together with inequality, we can get into quite a decent way of showing actually how people are well off. It's still not perfect, but it's I think the closest that we can get with our common statistical tools that we have in general terms. And I think this is actually exactly what should be also the aim of, for example, cohesion policy or investment policy. Very often what we have made as projects, and I know them from the Czech case, have been ones that somehow create or increase our competitiveness, which is not bad as such, but very often it was increasing our competitiveness in being able to produce something more cheaply, but not better. To, for example, foster employment but not to increase wages. And now we are kind of in a trap in the Czech Republic. Our unemployment is below 4%. We actually, I mean, this is basically on a, it's below the structural level for sure, and it's way too little at the end for the economy to function properly. I mean, maybe we are even overheating. I mean, not sure, but the wages are somehow stuck. So we are in a level of a low wage, low cost economy, which is also an issue that is of interest for other countries, because then we, even if we do not want to, we compete with our low wages with other countries. And it is partly because the cohesion policy has been focused on projects that are of and this is actually also answer to the second question, but on projects that have been trying to lower costs for the government, for example, maybe not being as additional because it has just replaced national investment in something, therefore being able to not to raise too much the tax level, for example, therefore competing on a more to the bottom on a tax level. It's maybe less case of the Czech Republic than of other countries, but that was the result. And I think that there are some interesting projects that we can think of, not much more of investment, but one of the ideas that I brought to the debate on the next financial framework policy was actually making something like a wage supplement to teachers from cohesion funds. It sounds as a silly thing, but if, for example, a state says every year from national resources I will raise the wages by 5%, and in addition to this, in the next 7 years or even 10 years, whatever period we talk about, there will be a European cohesion supplement for teachers. This will create a competition in skills to go to the education sector. That would mean actually that people will get better education. It will raise the wage level overall. It will be a huge project with no, let's say, problems of effectiveness or of impact on competitiveness, because the teacher sectors are not really a major component of competitiveness. So it will not distort the markets as well. It will distort them, but probably in a positive way. So these kind of, let's say, investments, anyway, it is not an investment in technically speaking, but it is investment to the future of the children. I mean, if I have to talk philosophically like this, or maybe yeah, but. So these projects like this could be also a subject of the next financial framework period, not just being able to open a new factory in a region that is somehow below the threshold for cohesion policy. That is questionable to what extent it has brought actually any social convergence altogether. Well, it has, but how much also and what spillovers to other member states, for example.
Thanks for the questions. First of all, I'll try to be very brief. First of all, if something qualifies for a climate-related investment, that doesn't mean that the rest is necessarily anti-climate or something like that. It means fossil or whatever. It means that it just doesn't qualify. Sometimes there are many projects that have something to do with the social sphere, and they don't qualify in the climate investments, but doesn't mean that the rest is necessarily like bad. The second point is that there is a strong push on the bank from outside, and there is a strong push by the board to the management committee, and the management committee pushes on the services of the bank to really look for and support and structure the projects that are, let's say, climate friendly. So definitely the bank is trying. It's not always as easy as it could look to reach those targets. But I would like to maybe mention very briefly something that doesn't relate to the EIB but still relates to post-MFF. I would just like to support, I don't know where it's going, the report of Mario Monti. It was lost in attention somewhere a few months ago, but he proposes, or the group proposes, some kind of new resources for the EU budget, and these could be invested for what he calls public goods or public commons on the European level. And I think it really makes sense because some challenges such security or defense or migration and climate change, one for all, they would totally deserve European solutions with European resources directed to that.
That was my last question, was about the own resources of the EU. So, but is there another question from the public? I take two. I hope it's short because they need to leave. You have to leave? Okay. Thank you for your input. Okay, I'll take the last two questions, please. You need to find the microphone. It's in the...
This is definitely not my field, but what would the speakers say about new investment through European or individual country bonds, which would be green transition bonds, and in which the government would have to promise to spend it on new climate investment? I think the public would respond to that in a very, very strong way. If it had a decent interest rate and you were confident in your government's capacity to pay, or that of the European Union, which I think most people are, would that be a good source of new investment and what people have been bringing up about investing in climate change?
Thank you.
Or defeating climate change?
Okay, thank you. My name is Rumen Gecev. I'm Professor of Economics, MP in Bulgaria, and former Minister of Economy and Deputy Prime Minister of Bulgaria. It's a very interesting topic. I would like to make a very short comments on the GDP, for instance. Unfortunately, maybe there is no better indicator than GDP at the moment, but we have to use it properly. For instance, the United Nations, as you know, they're using the Human Development Index, but all three indicators, health, education, and GDP per capita are mutually supportive. If you take a look at the statistical data, the countries with the higher indicators in the field of health and education are countries with the highest GDP per capita. Nothing to do with the GDP here. There is no reason to blame the indicator GDP. We have to use it better. For instance, if we recalculate the GDP as a energy consumption per unit of GDP, or harmful emissions per unit of GDP, then we will have a realistic picture. Also, if you recalculate the GDP per capita, talking about the households, based on the Gini index, we still can analyze pretty well in details the conditions of different economies. So what I'm saying, we have to distinguish between economic growth in general and economic development, because you may have countries like Saudi Arabia with relatively high economic growth when the price of oil is getting high, but at the same time, it's not an indicator for economic development. So if properly used the GDP, we can rely on different economic, social, and so on analysis. The second short comment will be on the suggestion that the public investments must be excluded from the measurement of government debt to GDP. And I share this understanding because it makes a dramatic difference of what we are using the public debt for. If we are using the public debt to increase just pensions or stipends and so on, it's one thing. But if we are directing the public investments into the real economy and the production of goods and services, it's a totally different story. That is why we disagree that the European Commission is measuring the public debt differently. Finally, if you take a look at the statistical data, Japan, they have 220% of government debt to GDP. Are they dying in Japan? Or they're one of the most competitive nations? And why 60% has to be the yardstick for the development of the European economy? Of course, we are not saying that the government debt has to be 150 or 300%, but we say that yes, we have to distinguish between different kinds of public investments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing with us this. It was meant to be one of the questions, really. I also agree about the public debt. It's quite a fight going on for already a couple of years on all levels. So maybe the last comments before we close the panel. Who would like to be first?
Just shortly, I think very briefly, because I will also have to run, on investment in climate change. The thing is, I think that there are more meaningful and less meaningful projects. I think that, for example, carbon capture, this is just my opinion, carbon capture is something that we should avoid because it's dealing with the impact, with the end of the question. We should more focus actually on not producing CO2 than on capturing it, for example. And in this vein, we should focus on projects and on technologies that are somehow modernizing with positive spillovers. And in the Czech debate on energy that I also partly take part in, there is a lot of companies criticizing the Energiewende change in Germany, because they think that it is not rational to do such and such decisions in the short term. The thing is that if they prevail and if they actually succeed in fulfilling the commitments, this will make the whole system actually work, and they will become more competitive because everybody would adjust their prices and their systems to this. So because they focus on technological progress and maybe not on projects that are just aimed on reducing the carbon per se. But this is a more general remark, and maybe not answering exactly what you asked, but this is my general view on investment in climate change, that it has to be modernizing as an opportunity to reach a commitment. And yes. But Ivan will react to that. I just wanted to make this point because I think it was also part of the debate before. And on the second one, actually, on public debt, I would say that sacrilege, that there is good and bad debt. Of course, it is not a view that is much welcomed in the European institutions, as one might guess. But I still think that there is a good reason for flexibility in identifying something that is good for investment and that is less good, and not just going in terms of the 60% of GDP. But the debate is extremely difficult, and it's extremely difficult to achieve common rules how to allocate investment so that it can be deemed to be a good or bad investment.
And very briefly to the first question on green bonds, I'm not an expert, but I was surprised to see at the informal ECOFIN in Amsterdam during the Dutch presidency that there was a very lively discussion led actually by the central bankers and by the Dutch governor of the central bank. I'm not sure to what extent this practice is widespread among the states. I don't know, maybe in Sweden. I know it's not something very common. I know some banks do it. The EIB definitely has green bonds. And as such, I mean, I support that idea. I would just like to add that sometimes there is a trade-off, because, I mean, if you go for green bonds, then probably your investors would not like to see you financing some kind of areas that were mentioned before by Aleš, for example, defense. Even though it would be research and development in defense, green bond investors don't like defense for some reason and for some obvious reason. So yes, I would go for that, but then we have to really be aware of this trade-off. And that will be the case for the national bonds, sovereign bonds as well.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I will have to close this panel because our speakers need to leave. Thank you very much for the very interesting questions, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much to all the speakers for this very interesting debate. It's always a pity that we don't have enough time every time for go more in depth in the debate. So I invite you now for the lunch break. There is a buffet right outside. Please feel free. And we will come back at 1:30 sharp with a very interesting debate on protecting workers' rights in the digital era, a topic that has been mentioned already several times, with interesting speakers like Nicolas Schmid. And thank you, Nicolas Schmid, that is in the room as Minister for Employment for Luxembourg, for being with us. Also, Luca Visentini, the Secretary General of ETUC, European Trade Union Confederation, and further on, Minister Anja Kopač-Mrak from Slovenia, also Minister of Labour. So I invite you to come back, and then later on we have also very interesting panel foreseen. So thank you very much, and seeing you in a minute at the buffet.